So, chapter 8, verses 1 through 21. I think we're just going to read it in chunks and go. It's a lot to retain. It's a long text, so I want to do it piece by piece in 3 different sections. Starting in verse 1. By the way, the sermon called The Power of the Insignificant. In those days, when again a great crowd had gathered, and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away. And his disciples answered him, How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And they set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish. And having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And there were about 4,000 people. And he sent them away. Let me ask you this. How are you usually doing when you've been fasting for 3 days? Pretty good? I'll tell you what, the holodets in the back of the fridge starts to look really good. Your nerves are different than what you're used to. Tasks take twice as long. In this account, I know that if I was a disciple of Jesus watching this, I would be tempted to tell Jesus, the people are hungry. I'm not even sure if they're going to listen to what you have to say if we don't meet their physical need. My instinct would be to panic. What are these people going to say about us? What is this going to cost? How will we find enough food for them in time? How will they get home? It's not like there's a grocery store somewhere around nearby. This was a reality check, a test of faith. As those who tend to walk by sight and not by faith, it's our instinct to fearfully calculate the impossible. And it would be so easy to perceive this circumstance as a mistake, like Jesus maybe miscalculated the cost of building a kingdom, that something has been overlooked. But that is the way of man to perceive this. You see, unbelief caused the disciples to focus on the problem. If we could go to the next slide. To focus on the problem and disregard what they knew about Jesus' character and power. So unbelief caused the disciples to focus on the problem and disregard what they knew about Jesus' character and power. When I read these texts, I remember feeling confused because they contradicted the compassion I know Jesus had, that he wouldn't feed them right away or take care of their most immediate needs. I've seen him plenty of times do this, meeting the needs of the people. Why is he allowing these to grow hungry to the point that some won't even be able to make it back home without fainting. But on the other hand, we know that Jesus doesn't just meet crowds and immediately speak a word over them and heal all of them at once. There is a procedure, and we see it here too, even in the counting and the breaking and the giving thanks to God before feeding them. Jesus' work is personal. He knows the people that are before him. He knows what they are enduring. He is moved with compassion for them, but he doesn't skip the plan of building his kingdom. There is symbolism in this passage. There are keys to help us grow and understand God, and so we must see these words and take them for all that they are worth. Jesus is aware of the circumstances, and in a hopeless situation, he provides a solution. Too often, we are like the disciples in this moment. Jesus makes clear or expresses his concern for the people around because he recognizes what's going on, while the disciples themselves struggle, counting the many faces that they have to feed. There's this great difference from where we begin in our faith to where we must end in the likeness of Christ. Oddly enough, this isn't the first time Jesus feeds a great crowd using very little. So it's a comfort, at least to me, to know that the disciples are slow learners, as am I. And so what is this takeaway here? We should recognize, we're a little too far ahead. We should recognize that Jesus is aware of the circumstances. And again, he provides in a desolate place, in a hopeless situation, what no one else could. Meaning he's not caught off guard or out of touch with what's going on. In fact, he considers not only their current hunger, but foresees what will happen if they do not eat, if he does not intervene. He knows how far they need to travel. He knows there's nothing to eat around. He knows they don't all have the means to even acquire food if they could. But he also knows this, that God the Father will provide. He knows that when he asks his Father in heaven, who is good, that he will give all that Jesus needs in the building of his kingdom. So without panic, he finishes his greater work, teaching and healing and building that kingdom. Then, moved with compassion, he makes sure to take care of their other needs. Now, we also need to understand the deeper truth about the solution that Jesus offers. You see, the multitude is not just starved bodily. They have also grown weak from the other famine. They are drained mentally, drained morally, drained spiritually. Each of us knows how quickly fasting affects our body. At least I assume we do. Our emotions and our frustrations are heightened. Our focus is crippled. With one thing on our minds, we continue in weakness. And this is to physically demonstrate to us? What happens to our souls when we become isolated from the satisfying, nourishing relationship with God that we were meant to have? When the Apostle Paul writes of people whose God is their belly, he refers to people who are governed by their flesh, slaves to it. Their comforts drive all of their behavior. They lack patience and self-control. And no matter how much they have of something, they are never satisfied. And this is the parallel reality of spiritual deprivation. After all, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. By the way, I don't know who needs to hear this, but fasting, it is a part of our practice that allows us to command authority over our flesh, to discipline our natural desires and exercise self-control. There's a common saying, if you cannot fast from it, you are a slave to it. If you cannot let go of it, you are a slave to it. And so fasting is not just this thing we consider if we feel as though we need it. It is the practice of the disciple who knows the power of Satan, the pull of the world, the devastating effects of sin, spiritual deprivation, and separation from God. So make it a practice of yours. Our Great Commission is not a challenge because we just need to find enough food to feed people. Our impossible task requires much more. How can we free slaves? Slaves to sin and death and fear. How can we breathe life into the dead? In this desolate world, from where might we satisfy the souls of mankind? In some parallel sense, this is the difficult thing the disciples see before them. There's a much greater calling here, and we'll dig a little bit more into it, but it is through Christ alone that we might find the cure to this kind of deprivation. Satisfaction from our hunger. And it was the same then as it is today. It is through the gospel. We can feed people, sure, but only God can change a heart. And consider this tragic reality lingering even amidst seeing Jesus perform powerful miracles, that those he raised from the dead would soon die again. Those he fed from the first 5,000 and the women and the children, they would hunger again. Jesus performed temporary works, and the meaningful part of what he was doing is that we could see his authority and power from God to have dominion over all of these things. And that one day those who put their trust in him might find a lasting cure. So it is not just the current issue that Jesus is considering when he helps people, but he considers what would happen to those who would be spiritually far off and hungry again. His true intention was to prove his deity and his authority over disease, demons, and even death. You could do the next slide. And he would proclaim that those who would believe in him could have a lasting, eternal, free from sin kind of life. And that meant everything. This was the true miracle gift that Jesus offered. The great joy of what he was doing here is not the temporary healings, but the proof that he was the Son of God who could finally claim the words, "Your sins are forgiven. You are reconciled to God, your Father." This was the thing that filled people with hope, not bread for today or maybe even tomorrow, but a life of satisfaction in him. This is the true compassion of Jesus for the crowd. That the kingdom he spoke of would be one without hunger or death altogether. He demonstrated that the curse on mankind could only be done away with by the power of God who was in him. Yes, the material needs of people are important even now, but the greater issue is the thing that is more heavily pressed upon by the Lord who reigns above us even today. The work ahead of us is not a matter of doing good things to earn favor with people. The work is not in convincing arguments or grand demonstrations, but a divine work of God who chose to carry out his message through mere disciples. And we see this parallel that the desert place had nothing to offer in its stores to feed the hungry. Likewise, the present age is as barren toward the goal of forgiving sin as it ever was. The weapons of God are beyond our human reasonings and strengths, entirely placed upon the power of the gospel through the Holy Spirit. By this, we learn that we cannot save our children, our friends, our enemies. We are fully dependent on God to do impossible things, to give life where there is none, to free us from the shackles of our sin that hold to us so desperately. All we can do as the disciples that he sends out is to hand out the broken loaves and fish to all who might receive it, and we pray that God would do the impossible work that is beyond our capability. And Christ is as eager to show mercy as he was then. He was not merely fulfilling the Old Testament prophecies of a Messiah that would do impossible things, but we see that he was emotionally moved by the conditions of his creation. He wasn't just checking off tasks. He was a witness to the pain and suffering of the ones he loved. And this compassionate love demanded a lasting solution, which Christ would later on sufficiently provide. You can go to the next slide. And another thing we learn from our Lord, compassion is expressed in meeting the needs of others regardless of the expense. You see, he gathers the little food that they had for themselves, ready to give all of it for the needs of others. I have not yet met a missionary of Christ who has not lost sleep, who has not gone hungry, who has not gone tired for the sake of others, giving up their comforts. True disciples know that the Lord will surely replenish them after they have given. And even then, they will see leftovers of His abundant blessing and grace. And this is such a lesson from the disciples who are learning to trust in the Lord against all odds. Look how well they piece together the impossible. We're in the middle of nowhere. We have 7 loaves. They even point out that the fish they have are small. And they count that there are at least 4,000 in the crowd. I have a feeling that they've been calculating this insurmountable task for those 3 days of hunger. How overwhelming it must have been. Yet all that truly matters here is that Jesus cares. And that is enough for them to find a solution, to overlook the impossible. You see, we're good at finding the reasons why not to do something. But the faith of Jesus teaches us that the true compassion nulls the impossible odds and calculations. You could do the next slide. The faith of Jesus shows us that the true compassion nulls impossible odds and calculations. It is with Jesus we learn that all things are possible, even to reach the dead. If we look at the world today, at first glance, one might easily be overwhelmed by the needs of the multitude. Maybe that's why Jesus draws to a desolate place, that there would be an evidence that God can provide even when our reality challenges our calling to love and to serve. Perhaps he wanted his disciples to recognize that it's not the earth, but God himself that feeds people. When you open your eyes in the morning, it is God who gives you sight. And when you close your eyes in the evening, it is God who gives you rest. And when you think that people I lost my train of thought. I think that people that truly recognize this reality, that God provides food and God provides spiritual healing, were the blind, the deaf, the tired, and the sick who came to see Jesus. They recognize that it all comes from him through the authority of his words. And likewise, when we go on missionary trips to South Dakota, and we see a broken city with few faithful servants and evil all around, we do not lose hope in a desolate place. We disregard the expense to ourselves before us, and we look to God who can provide, whose resources are limitless. And even when we run short of people, resources, or passion, we look to God, the worker of miracles. We might run out of bread, but never out of truth. Our true compassion is rooted in the greater gospel mission. We recall how once upon a time we were ones who needed not only to be physically fed, but to be made spiritually alive. And we had many channels of affliction affecting us, from the cruelties of mankind, from the poor choices we had made. But God's true compassion wasn't in removing those afflictions from our midst, but in the softening of our hearts that led to reconciliation with Him. We know that no amount of social services or technological advancements will help with the consequences and issue of sin. No matter whatever political party or invention of mankind, we cannot get rid of sin through physical means alone. Therefore, God is the compassionate provider we look to. He needs not to make us a bakery of endless bread and fish, but rather evangelists who will hold fast to the truth and who will also feed and care for the needy. We don't build our missionary efforts on humanitarian things, though giving water and food is good. Our primary goal is to reach people with the truth of the gospel, and only through that can their lives be transformed. Can they find peace in their hearts? Can they step away from their sins and put off the old clothing of their decaying life and put on the righteousness of Christ? It doesn't take great accountants like Arthur to stimulate the means by which we serve. It takes ordinary people who are willing to serve and walk by faith and believe that God can use them to accomplish His purposes, regardless of how impossible they may seem. And if we ever be overwhelmed, it takes only for each of us to pause what we have going on and hear these words echoed, "I have compassion on the crowd." And if this is true, and it is the nature of God to provide, and if Jesus still lives today, then we are the very means by which He continues His work of compassionate provision, especially through the gospel. He gathers the small, the insignificant, the leftovers, and He asked the disciples, "How many loaves do you have?" And I might further appeal to you who are here and ask you, what small talents do you have? What fragment of faith do you have? Bring them to the Lord, and He shall joyfully increase them. And this brings us to our next section, the effects of multiplication. Do you see how in the previous verses how not only did they feed the hungry to the point that they could make it back home, but they ate until they were fully satisfied. Not only that, but they had just as much as they began with. Next slide, please. Next slide. Christ, the great multiplier, doesn't collapse by what little we begin with. We have only to offer it up, and He will surely increase it beyond our expectations. We find this phenomenon true in even the very nature of what God has created. If we keep the small seeds of a fruit we've been eating and cast them on good soil, their increase will one day be overwhelming in abundance. From one, there come many. And this reality frees us from the dread of hopelessness. When a family has only a drop of forgiveness left in them, Christ can multiply its count beyond measure. When a city has only an insignificant few who are yet faithful to the truth, their words can be like a small match who sets a forest ablaze. Here is the pattern of God's calling for His disciples. Though they go out and serve with nothing, with very little, with insignificant amounts and talents and faith and love, He increases their portion, and by the end, they have more than they began with. And those touched by their service and their words are satisfied. Those of you who teach in Sunday school, I hope you've seen this effect. Rosa, you too. You give so much to these kids, and you don't know what it does. You feed them, and you pray that God uses even you who are imperfect to carry out His mission. And it is the same paradox that we see throughout Scriptures. Under God's divine blessing, the more you give, somehow the more you have. And you watch those kids, and it appears that you have been filled up by more in the giving to them. And it is similar to the paradox when a person dies to themselves, somehow they find an increase in their life. Or the person who is the least among us, somehow, by God's blessing, they are found to be greatest. So God doesn't operate in the same way that we do. If we count according to human reason, it is easy to be dismayed. But the one who relies and trusts in God knows that what the Lord has given is enough for each and will result in overstock for the future. I hope that we would understand this and that our fears would diminish and our reliance on the Spirit of God would increase, where we may receive a never-ending fount and an ever-growing supply of all that we need. It would have been easy for Jesus to make food out of nothing. I even think that He could have spoke and their starving would diminish. But what He does instead is He takes the time to collect the remnants. And He looks at them, sees how insignificant they are, and then He puts them to use. He trusts the Father's plan, who accomplishes His plan or His goal through the few insignificant sheep that He was given. And in this book, we are coming to the point in the ministry of Jesus where he prepares them before he's going to leave them. He even tells them at the end of chapter 8 here how the Son of Man must suffer and die, but that after the third day he would be risen again. And I believe that's significant and a parallel in this story of the multiplication. And look how it connects. Jesus is confined in the body to help one person or one crowd at a time. But how much more would he be able to accomplish through multitudes who would bear his name, who he would transform in his likeness, who he would teach his ways to? If his plan is to spread the kingdom to the ends of the earth, it's going to take him a really long time. And so he is giving this symbolic, parallel image of how he's going to accomplish the greatest redemption plan in the world. The key moment would be that after his death and resurrection, there would come a helper who would live in believers and lead them in the way of Christ to reach the ends of the earth. The multiplication of Christianity is symbolized in the feeding of thousands through a small fragment of leftover bread and fish. The overwhelming task becomes something possible. And he will use those who are weak, those who are foolish, those who are nothing, because true power comes from him, God who gives life and God who redeems it. Now notice that there's another kind of multiplication that we have to be cautious of. Continuing from verse 10. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." You see, the multiplication effect, it can work both for good and for bad. Like the scattered seed that turns to gardens, so too can hatred spread. Gossip, sin, doubt. Here we see a similarity in the disciples and the Pharisees. Though they each saw signs and wonders, they still doubted in their own ways, with different approaches, but doubt nonetheless. And worry builds in influence. The seed of doubt can take hold of our effectiveness in following Jesus' calling. The leaven of the Pharisees was like a small portion of yeast that would ruin the whole clump. A small amount of false teaching or understanding can corrupt an entire community. It can steal hope, faith, joy. And I know that we are good at casting doubt. We're good at spreading disdain and criticism. We are impatient to God's work and plans, so our suspense turns into disbelief or unbelief. We start to poke at the process God has in place. we begin to harden our hearts, to close our eyes to the needs of others, to focus only upon our own needs. I know this because I do this. And if I'm not careful of the seeds that take root in my heart, the influence of the world around me, I cannot be a faithful disciple. I must get rid of the impurities day by day. I must trust in God's process, that I don't have a better means of reaching the world or defeating sin. I must trust and obey and abide and study and be disciplined. And this repetition of subjecting myself to His work, His Spirit. And so we must be careful of the other kind of multiplication that ruins. And that leads us to this final short section. I think there's another one here if you go next. Our prayers should not be that God would give us visions or the voices of angels, to hear the voices of angels, but that He would increase our faith as we study Him. We think when we see Minneapolis and all the devastating things within it, or we see broken families even in our own church, we think that we need some great revival, some great sermon, some passage we've missed in the scriptures. But if we look at how Jesus used the disciples and comforts them, we see that we ought to just remain in our trust of the Lord, to not stray and look for other means to accomplish what was not meant to be. And even a devastating place like Minneapolis can be conquered by the Lord who is able, the Lord whose resources are infinite, whose love is unending, whose compassion is overwhelming. And so we are called not to look for things, but to practice in faith. If we go to the next slide, and we finish here in 16 through 21. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And this is crazy to me because this is right after what Jesus does. And I see that the disciples are just like me. We need repetition. We need to look again. We need to reinforce in our minds and remember who it is that we serve and how He accomplishes the impossible. Verse 17, and Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to Him 7. And He said to them, do you not yet understand? God has given you and me so many gifts of perception. Your ears to hear, your eyes to see, your mind to remember. He calls us then to study Him. Not look for new works and wonders and signs to prove who He is, but rather to look back on His word, on His fulfillment of the promises, on His faithful servitude, and just to mimic Him. just to know him. He calls us to study him. You could go to the next slide. That our faith might increase. That our understanding would position us to continue the works of Christ. When Jesus said in John 14, verse 12, "Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these will he do, because I am going to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, this I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it." And what he's talking about here is not that we would do, or the disciples would do, more powerful things than Jesus does. What he means is that it would be greater in magnitude, because there would be more of his church, the body, subjected to the head, carrying out his purposes, reaching the places that he doesn't physically reach in the limited time he had. You see, the disciples here are filled with worry, knowing that Jesus is going to leave them. But he actually tells them that it would be to them an advantage, because he would not just be among them, rather he would be in them, that he would live through them, that he would send the helper who would be a comforter to them, an interpreter, a source of strength, and so forth. And with that advantage, we can look upon this account and read between the lines to see the all-sufficient God who makes miracles in desolate circumstances and places. God who does the impossible through true faith and remembrance. Charles Spurgeon said, "The outcome of spiritually seeing, perceiving, and understanding is faith. He that believes little has learned little. He that doubts and is troubled is but a babe, needing still to learn the rudiments of holy scholarship." You know, studying the book of Mark is not that exciting for a whole year, and we recognize that. But it is meaningful, because it is the means by which God accomplishes his purposes, by which you grow, by which you are sanctified, season after season, in repetitive practice of faith and trusting, putting off the old self and putting on the new. It's less exciting than walking on water. It's less exciting than going to foreign places. But it is the way the disciples are meant to carry out the great insurmountable task before them. And as we witness the master of multiplication, we might today also make a practice of faith. You know, there have been times where it felt like the remnants of what we have is insufficient. I'll give you an example. The Michgad house that was built so that they could have more rooms and all that stuff for their family. I remember there was a deadline for an inspection, and we were so busy the whole time before this. And I remember working there from like sun up to sundown, and then I would sleep just a little bit on their floor with bugs all around me. And then I would keep working after just a little bit. And I remember catching myself asking God for strength because this wasn't the first time in a difficult situation where we have no energy, we have no passion, our resources, our finite bodies are limited. I remember times where, I don't know why, but God sends me messages through people from my high school who know that I'm a Christian, and they ask me for money a lot. I don't know why. I don't know if you guys get this too, but I remember, though I had not much, I would give it way too often. And I would cling to this thought that He will replenish. How many times has God provided for me when I wouldn't give it back, when I would waste it, when I would do evil with it, when I would be ungrateful for it? And He taught me that I also need to give like He gave to me my whole life. And not one person has returned money to me ever, but I still, when people do, I'm not saying you should reach out to me on Facebook and ask for money, but I always have this sense like, God, am I just being irresponsible? Or am I doing too much sometimes with my work or the hours we spend volunteering in different places? And I always cling to this thought to walk by faith, that the Lord will replenish, that the small thing I have to offer is something that He will use in greater ways. And I hope that as disciples, when we see this pattern, that we would not keep in this place of questioning and grasping onto earthly things, but that we would let go and let, I don't want to say that phrase, that we would truly trust ourselves to Him and our resources, that He will bless us in a greater way than we can imagine. The worship team, you can come up. So many times in my life I saw similar impossible things, and yet I remember I kept going, and I knew that there were those that benefited and that there was more left over, and I knew that the treasures of Christ had not diminished in any way, that He was ready to give more. And I asked myself, how is it that I don't yet understand? How is it that I still hunger? How is it that I still complain? I must give the Spirit room to remedy my faith. I must count Christ precious. I must see His working hands in my life as I give more and I have more. Let's worship God for being faithful to all of us in different ways.